In this episode, I'm joined by Naomi Levine, author under her birth name Norma Levine, of multiple books, including The Miraculous 16th Karmapa, A Quest for the Hidden Lands, and Chronicles of Love and Death, My Years with the Last Spiritual King of Bhutan. Naomi recalls why she dropped out of academia to pursue an alternative lifestyle, and through a series of life-changing encounters with Tibetan gurus such as Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, the 16th Karmapa, and Tai Situpa, converted to Buddhism and moved to India to pursue a life of yogic practice. Naomi describes her close discipleship under Tai Situpa and recounts her initial meeting and subsequent multi-year relationship with the Shabdrung, a highly revered Bhutanese tulku said to possess potent magical abilities. Naomi also discusses the difficulty of differentiating between crazy wisdom and abusive behaviour, reflects on her own naivety about what the practice of Vajrayana really entails, and describes the signs of enlightenment after the death of great beings. So without further ado, Naomi Levine. Naomi Levine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm so delighted to be talking with you today about your life and your many books, in fact, and you're still actually writing more and publishing more. Perhaps you could say something about this new set of books you've been writing, this series of trilogies.
That's right. I got to the point during the pandemic where I felt I really wanted to write. And I always had this idea that I wanted to leave a legacy of some kind, being of a certain generation, which is, you could say, the 60s, 70s generation. I wanted to leave something behind that really puts the context into what's so different now. You know, everything is so different now. So I felt like I had left the world completely behind during the pandemic, and I wanted to bring out the stories in terms of like spiritual adventures almost, and also driven by a very strong desire to recreate in a very easy to read, easy to understand form that anybody could get into. And so I recreated the first trilogy was called A Quest for the Hidden Lands. And that's a photograph of the paperback with an endorsement by Dr. Ian Baker, whom we all know to be the primary maestro and key player in discovering the waterfall, the secret waterfall, and all that, which is probably too much to go into now. Anyway, it starts for me in that book. It starts from the beginning where I have I describe it as a meeting of minds with my guru, who turned out to be my guru. So, and then it goes on to another story about my dog, which I like very much, actually. And then further, it goes into how I managed eventually, after 15 years, to explore the hidden lands of Pemmico, the hidden land of Pemmico. So that is one trilogy, which is available now on Amazon Kindle in various formats, also Audible. And the next one that I have put out recently is called Kailash, the Precious Snow Mountain. And it has a central figure in it who I was very, very fortunate to meet, called Lo Kunzang Rinpoche, a great yogi from living in Tibet. And he was our guide around the main story there, the pilgrimage. And then I will write another set of trilogies called A Twist in the Tale, which are a bit more political. So, and then turn the three into one book called Stepping Stones, which really explores the journey. That's what I can call it, the journey, and the setbacks of the journey, and the immense joy in completing the journey.
Yes, that's very interesting. In another of your book, Chronicles of Love and Death, you describe your generation. You're talking there about your generation as the last free generation and able to go where you wanted without passports and etc. etc. So I'm wondering what you meant by that. If you could expand a bit on that idea of the last free generation. It's something that comes up in a few of your books. And as you look at the world today compared to then, what are the dimensions of meaning that are associated with that?
Well, today, for example, if you wanted to go overland to India, you simply couldn't do it. Absolutely not. You would never get through places like Iran or Afghanistan or probably even maybe Pakistan. And at that time that we did this overland journey, I think it was, I'm trying to remember when it was, 1979, 79 that was, by bus. Not a magic bus, not a bus that you took, you sat down and you got there at the end, 5 days later or something. No, it was local buses all the way. And what I mean is we had the freedom to do that and not to be afraid. Actually, not to be afraid. There were no terrorists around. Afghanistan was, when we finally got to Afghanistan, actually, we got to Kandahar. And it was delightful. It was peaceful. It was a hippie culture. The hippies were there. In fact, I think the hippies were living in those caves that the Taliban then lived in, Tora Bora, those kind of places. And I didn't classify myself as a hippie, I have to say, because I was an academic and I had left the academic world. Really, when I say academic, I mean doctoral theses and the like, and literature was my background. I had left that behind. And, today it would be actually very unusual to be within shooting distance of getting a very high degree, like a PhD, and then just saying, no, I'm not going down that road. There's another road that I want to go down, and I'm going to go down it. To have the freedom to say that to oneself and feel that it was the right decision, or you could make it the right decision. And that is a very interesting freedom to have. I never thought about security or the future and or my career or anything like that. It was actually that's a freedom that most people, 90% of people, young people now, don't have. Maybe there's a gap year, but that's about it. No, this was a full pulling out of a culture that I was born in, into this culture, into Western culture, and then lived for 5 years in a monastery, built my retreat house there, and thought that I would stay there the rest of my life. That was kind of freedom, and we didn't need visas. As being, I was at the time I had a Canadian passport. We didn't need visas. British and Commonwealth, no visas. So these things were really a generational, and I'm talking about, it went up until about the 80s, I think, and then the world changed quite significantly and continues to change. Of course, everything does, but freedom is a word that I really it was really generated in me in the 60s and 70s, I would say, because there was freedom there. There was freedom to choose your own life, and of course, not everybody had it even then. You'd have to be middle class. You'd have to be, or something like that. You'd have to have some kind of understanding, and maybe even just intellectual understanding, to be able to negotiate the parameters of freedom.
What do you think changed? What did you see changing
Yeah,
that closed that off?
yeah. For one thing, in this country, it was Margaret Thatcher, and her. Although I don't dislike her now, but at the time I remember that was that was something that changed the country. The strikes, the way everything was handled. It had to happen. I'm not a political type of, I'm not left or right. I'm not interested in all that kind of thing. But Thatcher was a factor, and the European Union, which we had just joined, I think, around that time, changed it as well. For the better or for worse, I have no idea. But those were like immediate factors involved in the change that weren't there when I first came to this country to live in the 70s. And of course, we were the generation of peace and love. Music changed and became more punk, more anarchic. All these things changed considerably. And then there was, the royal family as well. And the, this country is very much to do with the monarchy. I think has a great deal to do with the monarchy. Things were starting to splinter off even then from the cohesiveness that I thought was there before.
Yes, I have heard it said that for a counterculture to thrive, there has to be a culture against which to be counter.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And there was, well, of course, the 50s and, up until the mid 60s, culture was very just post-war, wasn't it? And the attitudes of people towards sex and religion and so on were very narrowly defined. And that of course started to change around Woodstock and the peace and love revolution, and the music. The music, I think, was a revolution in itself. I still listen to music. I still listen to Bob Dylan. I still listen to the Rolling Stones. I would still go to concerts. I love Johnny Cash. So anyway, yeah, that's my take on it.
Mm. Well, let's talk a bit then about that time period for you biographically. You were born in, as you mentioned, in Canada, near Montreal, and you were completing graduate degrees in drama and literature at McGill in Toronto, and you I believe you finished your PhD thesis. I suppose you just didn't defend it.
That's right.
Yeah, that seems an unusual choice. So I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about your background, the context of your upbringing and so on, and why you made that decision at that point.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back what was the precise, the moment I was, I was writing a thesis on an English playwright called Arnold Wesker, who was part of a grassroots playwright movement, including John Osborne and Harold Pinter and Bernard Copps. Anyway, these were sort of like more, I don't know what you can call it, as they certainly didn't all have the same idea as Wesker. But anyway, I was writing a thesis on Wesker, and I was living in his house in the Black Mountains of Wales. That was the thing. He told me, go and stay there. There's nobody there now. And you can write a thesis in peace. So I did, but the first thing that happened is that I met a group of squatters living in a deserted house quite close, and became quite good friends with them and hung out with them. And then I started to think getting to Hay-on-Wye was a big deal in my life. And several of my stories actually start out in Hay-on-Wye, because I found it such an extraordinary and interesting village in itself. Just the way that the river, you know, flowed in front, winding in front, and the Black Mountains behind. The feng shui of Hay-on-Wye was something that everybody could look at and say, one day this place will really be on the map. And it was inhabited by hill farmers and gentry and shopkeepers. And I kind of fell in love with the Black Mountains and Hay-on-Wye. And suddenly the thesis started to play a fainter and fainter role in my life. But I'm a sort of person who likes to finish what they start. So I kept on doing it anyway. And of course, theses require footnotes and bibliographies and things like that. So I got very, you know, I was very good at doing that. But one day I thought, this is not a life. This is not the life that I want to lead. Now, the life that I was born into was, I come from a Jewish family. My mother was born in Poland, but she got out when she was 12 years old. So she didn't experience the war, the Second World War. And my father was born in Canada. So I never felt akin being into the religion. The religion didn't mean anything to me, and nor does Christianity, nor Islam. I mean, the theocratic, is that the right word? Theocratic, yeah. The God religions don't hit it, don't strike a bell for me at all. So I was a little bit of an alien in my family. And I also actually felt like an alien. So I withdrew. I withdrew, and I started to find a life somewhere else within another culture. And I guess it was just around the time of the big counterculture movement. I felt much more comfortable and freer within that. And most of my friends were in that kind of age range as well. So I moved away from my family. I moved away from my birth religion. I moved away from my country. And because I was always literary, I was always a kind of literary person. I found very comfortable. I found it comfortable being in the UK, meaning Wales and England, really. And that's where my new life, I should say, was around the time of my Saturn return when I was 28, and things started to change in a very rapid way. You know, it was a really transformative couple of years, which brought me to Hay-on-Wye and to deciding not to defend my thesis and freaking everyone out, of course. And then I opened up a natural food shop, which was kind of wonderful, you know, the first of its kind in Hay-on-Wye. And I had the experience of standing behind a gigantic mahogany counter and, you know, scoops and bags and barrels and things like that, and recycling. I mean, I was way ahead of the time, I have to say, way ahead. So I kept that up for about 7 years. And then what happened is during that time, I got a phone call from a friend in Aberdeenshire, Lord Urquhart, Alex Urquhart, and he lived in a castle there, and he invited me to come and visit. So I decided that I would need to stop somewhere along the way. I found out that there was a monastery, not a monastery, but something where I thought, well, I can stay there. And that was called Sammeling in Scotland. So I stayed there, and who should arrive there but Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, which was his first time out in the West, first time out of Bhutan. So that was truly a major event. I went back, and then I went back to Hay-on-Wye, that is, and then a few years later, I don't think it was more than a few years, the 16th Karmapa came to a little farm in the Black Mountains called Karmanara, and there he did the Black Crown ceremony for well, maybe about 70 people coming out the doorway. I was right inside. It was an event that changed the course of my life, changed the direction of my life truly, and set me on the road to India. So I gave up everything again, sold everything, sold my beautiful showman's wagon, and sold my shop that I was running, and brought my dog to India and started to live at Shabdrung Monastery in the foothills of the Himalayas, and stayed there for 5 years and built a house. So that's the brief version, summary. I hope I didn't leave out anything too much.
Yes, and actually in Quest for Hidden Lands, about that time, you write, my budding career as a literary scholar was suddenly hijacked by a singular, seemingly random event. It was 1976 when I tiptoed into a tiny Buddhist shrine room in a farmhouse nestled into the Black Mountains of Wales, and there beheld a Tibetan master sitting on a splendid throne, performing a ceremony known as the Black Hat. My busy academic mind came to an immediate stop, suspended, and remained in the dimension his presence had created. I was inside a deep level of mind, very familiar, but lost and forgotten, like the secret garden of childhood. The master on the throne was the 16th Karmapa, and although I never even spoke to him personally, he introduced me to the essence, the truth, hidden behind that busyness. So that was quite a period of meeting some of the most revered gurus and masters of the time, having come out of Tibet as they did. Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche you mentioned, as well as the 16th Karmapa. I'm wondering if you might say something a little bit more about those first meetings. I believe it was Dilgo Khyentse first, and then 16th Karmapa. Your impressions of them?
Well, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was the biggest man I'd ever seen in my life. Huge in stature. I mean, that was my first impression. And naked to the waist, and with a top knot. And he sat on the throne for several days, because it was just before Losar. It was just before the Tibetan New Year. I mean, none of this did I know when I set out. None of it at all. I thought I was just going to see Lord Alex in his castle. So this was an amazing. Well, I don't even know if you can call it coincidence, because it's more than that. It's destiny, really, isn't it? And now I've got my dog here. So that my impression of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was, again, this kind of very similar thing happened where you don't know what's going on intellectually, but you know that you're in the right place and the right time, and it's meaningful in a completely different way. So it's not like I knew anything at all. I wasn't looking for Buddhism. I wasn't looking for anything. But again, with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, at that time, I didn't try to make an appointment with him or speak to him. I just sat there while this great orchestra of horns and drums and cymbals was a sort of like an introduction to the purification for the new year. So I mean, I was impressed. I was impressed deeply in a part of my being that I had not ever been inside, if you know what I mean. And that was the, very, very even more profound experience with the 16th Karmapa. The 16th Karmapa was not only like that, but to me, he was extremely, the only word I can use is awesome. Awesome, even though it means something different now, or people use it in a different way. But it was truly like, how do I even function in terms of speaking to someone like that? Does he even speak? It was that kind of thing. Here was somebody who was beyond everything, and yet there, So that's the presence that I absorbed, which I later understood to be more like a pointing out instruction in terms of coming into contact with your own mind, understanding your own, but I didn't know that at the time. I had no way of putting that together at the time. It's something that came much later. So I was very lucky to meet, I mean, all of us in that generation were extremely blessed with good fortune and timing. And then, of course, I went to India, and there I met my guru, Tai Situ Rinpoche. And he was so different because although Tibetan, he was very interested in Westerners, very interested in speaking English, very interested in everything kind of Aquarian, very interested in music. He was like a brother more than a guru at first. I mean, this is to say, this is the honeymoon. This is a sort of like the engagement period. But yeah, I kind of fell in love, really. That's what it was. I fell in love. And I wanted to do nothing more than spend the rest of my life with my guru. But of course, things don't always work out, the way you think they're going to work out. So, but I never would give up that period of time that I spent there, 5 years in all, with all the, the bumps and bruises along the way. I'm very grateful to have had that period.
In Chronicles of Love and Death, you write about that period. In that initial intoxicated stage of devotion, Tai Situ Rinpoche was a Buddha, whose pure love melted our hearts and saturated Shabdrung in light rays. It seemed enough. We would build houses, receive teachings, do retreats, and attain enlightenment. I thought it might take up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's actually a theme I wanted to ask you about or explore with you, which is what you thought you were getting into at the time and what it ended up being, and now how you reflect on that. You talked about that those initial encounters in 1976 as being, you'd already dropped out, but now you were tuning in, to use that counterculture phrase. And I wondered about that. What did you think you were tuning into? Was it that mystical experience that was your North Star? Was there a social dimension to it? Was there a dimension of purpose or meaning? What did you think at that day? In those days, of course, you didn't know about the religion in depth. What did you think you were getting into? And how did it turn out? And now what do you think, looking back?
Well, that's a very, very profound question. Really, really profound. I mean, I did not think I was getting into another religion. I did not see Buddhism as a religion. I saw Buddhism as the highest path to explain, that explained everything. Like when I looked at the Wheel of Life, or someone explained the Wheel of Life to me, I saw what it was. I understood what it was, like in a very, could say, a shallow way. but I understood that this was a map of the mind, you know, and so I think I realized that I had always been a Buddhist, but I had to find that out for myself. But I never looked back or regretted anything about that. So I had this, like most people, I think at the time, a rather romantic idea of what I was getting into. And I had no idea what was really involved in Vajrayana. Vajrayana was what I was immediately stepped into, not the not Hinayana, but the Theravadan tradition. I went right into the Tibetan tradition, which is all Vajrayana. And before we knew it, I mean, Tai Situ had us all doing prostrations and the vehicle, the preliminaries, and long retreats on Nunye, which is a fasting retreat where you don't eat for you take your last sip of water basically at 1 o'clock or something like that, noon, and you don't eat again the whole of the next day, and then you eat lunch or breakfast the day following. So it's a very long, it goes like that, in and out, and you do as many as you can do at a time. But we were all given 108 sets, which is actually 6 months of this, but you can break it up and have, you know, holidays or vacations in between. So we were all given that to do. And it was it was a very interesting period of time, because first we got to, know our guru, or he got to know us. Definitely, we got to know him, but that was a different story altogether. And he got to know us, and then he gave one-to-one teachings on whatever it was. I did quite a few retreats there. It was hard. It was tough. It was a bit of a boot camp, and of course, you're free to go anytime you want, but once you get to that point where you found your guru and you feel comfortable with your circle of like-minded friends, and you're forming a little sangha, you don't want to go anywhere else. There is nowhere else to go, frankly, even if you wanted to. You can go to Dharamsala, from there, and join the people from Rajneesh Ashram from Pune and dance on the tabletops, but you you have found the jewel, and one simply knows it, and so nowhere else to go. Anyway, what was the question? Yeah, how did it end up? How does it end up? It ends up with you understanding, and I'm talking about me, and I think probably most people, you understand that the guru is not your best friend. That's the truth. The guru is not your best friend. He is a guru. He can turn around and do and say things that nobody else can do. And the point is to really crack the ego. So that's a very unpleasant experience, I have to say. Nobody likes their ego to be trampled on, or nobody likes to be humiliated. And it goes on. It goes on. So the end experience is that I think I couldn't take it, the whole thing. I couldn't take the whole thing. And I asked my guru if I could go to Karmapa. I needed a break. Karmapa had just escaped from Tibet. And he said, yes. Yes. go to Karmapa, but you can always come back. Which was, ultimately, the Tai Situ is he's a great bodhisattva, really, truly great bodhisattva. And it's very hard to even understand what that is, even understand it. It just means that everything that he does is bodhicitta. It's not coming from his ego. It's not coming from his need. It's so, you have to be a very mature individual to do Vajrayana at all. And I thought I really wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready for the whole hog. So I went happily to Karmapa, and he let me in. He let me in. He let me into his heart. And we had a wonderful several years of a very beautiful exchange. And then he sent me back to Tai Situ. So where does it end? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have come to the conclusion I'm not really capable of getting enlightened in this lifetime, and I don't think about it too much because it would ruin my day. So I have to trot along and recognize, I think I recognize my own limitations now more than I did before. I'm shall I say, more in tune with what's involved in even putting one foot on the ladder of enlightenment. That's my experience. And I admire people who can close themselves off and just do retreat, because that's the only thing that's worth doing. So I'm still a practitioner, but I don't take any much credit for that.
When you say what's involved, what are you thinking of?
Well, what's involved is you have to be able to be, I think it's maturity that's involved. Most people who came from the first generation we were not mature. How could we be? How could we be mature? Situ Rinpoche said to me once, I thought you were all yogis because you had left everything in your country behind, because you didn't care about security, because you made this journey by yourselves and you were wandering. He said, I thought you were yogis. I said, well, we thought you were a Buddha. So you see, it was like, I don't know whether I think he thought we were yogis, and then he realized, no, we're hippies. We're hippies. That's a big difference. And then he cracked down, cracked the whip. So what is involved is you have to be prepared to be, no, you can't prepare, that you cannot prepare for Vajrayana. It's a path that that unfolds as you go along. And then you say, my God, how did I ever get in here? Or you might say, isn't it wonderful that I got here? It's a very tough path, because you have to really, really 100% keep samaya with the guru. That's why the guru can insult you, humiliate you, and if you believe that it's coming from bodhicitta, you would be hurt, but you would not, maybe you would not be breaking samaya, No, so that's something I have learned, which is very, very hard to learn now in the current climate. It's in fact, I think it's almost impossible to teach Vajrayana now properly. caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. No, I mean, you can't put enough caveats around Vajrayana. It's serious stuff. So I'm saying this not because I'm, complaining. I think it's the most extraordinary path ever, and it has great results if you can bear it, getting through it.
Why do you say that Vajrayana can't really be taught today in the current climate?
Because, for example, some of the lamas misbehave, to say the least. So if you get a lama who misbehaves and you think you're getting a special teaching, but in fact, you're not. And then all the social conditions around you tell you that you should out this person. And if you've taken empowerments and all that and taken him as your guru, I would say you're breaking Samaya. But other people would say, no, you're not breaking Samaya, you're helping other people not to be destroyed. So that's the way it is. The climate is such that it should be taught one-to-one and kind of secretly. It's a secret path. I mean, at the higher stages anyway. And it's not for everyone, not at all, not at all. So, yeah, that's when I mean, there's the classic story of Tilopa and Naropa. Naropa suffered, so-called, suffered. He was a great, great, great being. He suffered enormously. He did everything his guru asked him. He never had to, so-called, practice at all because he kept the Samaya of doing whatever the guru asked him to do, although it would be considered total abuse. Tilopa would get locked up today. But, because he had such 100% strong faith in the Buddha quality of his guru, of Tilopa, he never had to do a second of practice. He got enlightened just naturally with a slap on the face or something with a shoe, So that is Vajrayana, classic Vajrayana. Well, how many people can do anything even approximating that? It's that's what I'm talking about. How many great gurus are there? How much time do they have to teach one-to-one? That's another factor. And how much time that the student is prepared to give over, their life to it. This is the factors now. And of course, our minds are very, very, very busy all the time with all the technology, computers, looking at screens. It's that period of time of, like Milarepa sitting in a cave. It's gone. Maybe a few people do it. Maybe a few Tibetans do it in Tibet. I think they do, because there are still examples of, Tukdam, where they meditate through the death state. Well, you have to be very realized to do that. In fact, I can't remember his name now. Tenga Rinpoche, all the way, did it all the way. Great being. So you see, well, I'm sure you know these things, but this is just really how it was, how I experienced it. Yes, and then I moved back, of course. That period of time was broken when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. and everyone had to have visas to live in India, so that broke it up. And also it broke, well, of course, it changed my relationship with the Shabdrung, which I was, with whom I was involved while I was in India.
Well, seeing as you've raised that, perhaps we could touch on that. It's the subject of your book, Chronicles of Love and Death, My Years with the Lost Spiritual King of Bhutan. It's not the only subject of that book, but it's the main theme, of course. I'm wondering if you could say a little about the Shabdrung, who he was, how you met him, and how that particular story unfolded.
Oh my goodness. Oh gosh, yeah. So how did I meet him? I heard when I went to India, I went to Pema with a friend, which is a Guru Rinpoche place, a very sacred place where the lake is, where he was seen with his consort Mandarava. Anyway, forget that. I'll start a different way. I went to Pema, and I met somebody there, an English lady living in a cave, and she said, do you know Jigme? Jigme, when you go back, she said to me and my friend, when you go back, go and visit Jigme. Who's Jigme? Oh, Jigme is the spiritual king of Bhutan, and he likes to practice English, and he's always looking for someone to talk to. And he's living at BJ Palace, she said, BJ Palace. And she also said that he is he's a siddha. She said he's a siddha. And she gave a description of something that he had done to save somebody from drowning in the lake. And I can't really remember how it goes right now, frankly. But so we went, my friend and I, we went to see Jigme. And I describe it in the book, I think, quite well. Can you find the passage and read it? Because I think it's one of the passages that I feel very strongly that it's better to read it. From the moment, it's chapter 2, it's the beginning of chapter 2.
So page 26, Shabdrung Ngawang Jigme, the exiled spiritual king of Bhutan, looked at himself in the mirror on the veranda of Bijai Palace, the crumbling remains of what had once been the Dalai Lama's temporary residence. I watched him, invisible for a moment, before climbing the stairs to the veranda. It was a late autumn afternoon in northern India, with a hint of impending darkness, but I could see him tying and untying a blue scarf around his large head, inspecting every part of his reflection. He was wearing a tight, ill-fitting jacket, which hugged his massive chest and hips, struggling to reach his short, heavy thighs. His face was broad, with a prominent nose, full sensuous lips, and fearless, mocking eyes. He touched his moustache, an as yet undefined accessory, which seemed to preoccupy and bemuse him. His body, like a tightly packed container, rested on 2 small, delicate feet. Whirling around abruptly, he stretched out his hand to greet me. "Aha! Why did you take so long?" The question seemed to come from someone who was neither man nor boy, but a force field of magnetic male energy. I was taken aback. There had been no prior contact, no arrangement or plan.
Yeah. So that's how I met him. He seemed to know I was coming, or someone was coming, and that someone would be important in his life. I think that's the impression I got. I knew nothing about him, but I found out more and more, of course, and who he really was extremely hidden. I mean, he didn't really show who he was, and he didn't have any accompanying retinue. He was alone, which is not something you see very often with a High Lama. So it was very intriguing to me. And also I had this feeling that he was lonely and he needed friends. And so I really wanted to be a friend. But then he fell in love. He fell in love with me, and that was the beginning of our rather, unusual relationship, and the beginning of the whole story, which is full of kind of there's a sort of a little bit of a dark side there as well. I think I was, and I'm saying this as a sort of slight, tongue-in-cheek. I was going to call it tantric sex, black magic, and crazy love. I mean, of course, I didn't call it that, but that gives you some idea of the factors in this relationship in the book that I described. And a lot of it was coming from his previous lifetimes, where he was the person who, well, I mean, the story is just incredible, you know, how the first Shabdrung, Nawang Namgyal, in the, what century was it? Was the same time as the 5th Dalai Lama, how he turned the warring tribes of Bhutan into a unified Buddhist kingdom. So that story is truly amazing, because he was, Siddha, I mean Mahasiddha. He was really a Mahasiddha. He could fight battles by, sitting in a cave, meditating and manifesting terrifying apparitions in the battlefield. That's how the Bhutanese kingdom was established, by fending off the Tibetans. So it's just the story itself was just so dramatic. That's the word. It brought out all my, karma for drama. I think I went from, I can say in one way, I went from drama to trauma to dharma to karma. I mean, whatever. It was all there, all of it was there. And there's no question, this is also interesting. There's no question but that great beings can undergo trauma as well. There's no question. I saw that. He had been traumatized from being, from being killed. You remember, if you're someone like that, you will remember a previous lifetime. And he did. He remembered several previous lifetimes. So, but, he didn't have the karma or the conditions. He had the karma, but he didn't have the conditions to manifest who he really was. I was always I sort of wanted, or at least I thought I wanted, a sort of normal relationship, but there was no way that this was going to be a normal relationship. No way. So I had no idea. I mean, I was a little girl lost in the jungle, of another, not just another Eastern culture, but a supernatural world. I really got deeply involved in that, to the point where, his protectors manifested for me as well. I mean, this was, a big deal. It took me many, many years to, process it. Many years, many, many, many years. I didn't go into therapy or anything, but I know that it was just a defining experience. Yeah. So all this happened in the 5 years that I was living in India. And then it continued after I got back from India, and we had one more meeting after that, which sort of ended it.
Yes, and it's a book full of twists and turns.
Is it? Yeah.
And it's not something that can easily be summarized in this context. And I would recommend, if people are interested in it, to get Chronicles of Love and Death and to read that. It details everything. A couple of themes or questions that come to my mind in association with what you've written in this book. One of them was, you've brought it up here again, who was he? And I'll quote one section. I persisted. You're not a monk, I replied. I'm not a lama either. But you are a Rinpoche. You're not an ordinary man. He replies, I'm not a Rinpoche. Who says I'm a Rinpoche? He asked challengingly. You reply, Situ Rinpoche says you are very great, like the Dalai Lama. Jigmai looked pleased, momentarily excited. His eyes lit up with interest. Really? He said that? He thought for a moment. Whoever says I'm a great man must be a fool. We have to study, read texts, do many practices, meditate in caves for 12 years or longer, then get all the signs. These are the real lamas. Do you know anyone who's doing that these days? And then later, you write about a question you write here that would haunt me for the rest of our relationship. Was this crazy wisdom or just craziness coming from the disturbances of his psyche? Was he a power maniac who was trying to possess me because he'd lost everything else? So I'm wondering, who do you think he thought he was? And maybe that's a silly question. Maybe that's the wrong kind of question to ask. But nonetheless, that's what came to my mind. And who do you think he was?
You mean in terms of, was he crazy, or was he, was it crazy wisdom, or was he just crazy?
Well, what I mean, first of all, is why was he denying being a lama, denying being a Rinpoche? Why was he qualifying himself as saying, you know, I haven't studied the texts and done the practices and so on and so forth? What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he's trying to disabuse me of the notion that the way I'm seeing things, because he knows a lot more than me about the system. And he thinks that I have stumbled into something that I know nothing about. So I think he's warning me more what's involved in being a lama or a great lama or a Rinpoche, and making me understand something, that it's not just a name, that you're not just born and then you manifest, you know, and you're named so-and-so and then you manifest. He's trying to tell me that there is a lot, you have to go, the real lamas have to go back and learn it all over again and manifest it all over again. So it's not like pouring water from one bottle to another. That's what he's saying. He thinks I'm naive, and I certainly was. I learned a great deal from him. Great deal. To the point where I completely, totally never entered my mind until much later that could this just be abusive. It never entered my mind. That's very, like, it's very interesting, because I never thought in that way. I never thought like people think now. Well, he's not treating me properly. Well, I didn't think he was treating me properly. I got angry, you know, we had fights and so on and so forth. But I never thought this man is actually abusive. In a certain sense, I can see that he was now, but it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter. It's not a cause for concern. What I got out of it was so much more than that kind of egotistic way of looking at it. It was so much more. And I never, of course, I wrote this way before Me Too, way, way, way before, and way after the relationship had ended. So there was like a 20-year period in between before I wrote that book. So I had plenty of time to look back and recall it. I just had a very good memory, very good recall. And well, I was not in that Me Too mode. No, I mean, it was way before that anyway. So I never even thought that way. That's the truth. I never thought that way. But some people might look at it. No, actually, all the reviews of that book that I see on Amazon, all the reviews really respect it. They see where it's coming from. They see it. They don't. They see it as more complicated, and it was more complicated. The actual story of the assassination that is told in the book, it still makes me feel. I went to Bhutan afterwards. Oh, much afterwards. Actually, I went to Bhutan before the book was published because I knew that I wouldn't be able to get in after it had been published. So I went before, and I saw what it was like. I mean, I saw, of course, you can see dark side, you can see light side. It's your perceptions. I did see a very repressive for its own people. In terms of its own people, it was quite repressive, quite repressive. I mean, the signs, maybe it's not there anymore because you've been there recently, but signs prohibiting ordinary clothes inside that area, that you have to wear the Bhutanese, the correct Bhutanese clothes to get inside this temple, that kind of thing. Or even just the fact that people were drinking a lot. There was a lot of alcohol consumption. So I never thought that gross national happiness was actually really happening in Bhutan. I may be wrong, really, truly. I don't want you to get the impression that this is the only way to see it. No, not at all. I'm seeing it through a particular lens. I was looking at it, from a particular lens. And, and all, well, it's such an extraordinary story. Will somebody rid me of this troublesome priest is the only kind of analogy that I can think of for saying that you didn't kill the king, but that's how the king was killed. Simply enough. I don't know if you've read Michael Harris's book on Bhutan or his several books on Bhutan, but a lot of it is in there. I did my research as well.
Yes, and I think the perspective in the book, Chronicles of Love and Death, it is your personal story. It is your personal window via your relationship with the Shabdrung into that world. That's how you present it. You don't present it as the definitive end statement whatsoever. It's very personally written, and I think that comes across. You mentioned the supernatural aspects, and the Shabdrung, as you said, was known as a great wizard. The original Shabdrung, I mean, and that line was known.
It was known as the Great Magician. The Great Magician.
The Great Magician, right. And you did have a lot of sort of very strange supernatural encounters in the course of your relationship. You mentioned the Dharma protectors, or rather the...
Yeah, what are they called? They're the worldly protectors.
Right.
That's who they are.
Yeah.
He has his own worldly protectors. They are not enlightened protectors. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, and also the incident with Patrick Boone Ikehi.
God, I know. That happened, honestly. It looks like, I don't even think I have the imagination to dream that. This really happened. And the letter. Anyway, it's very, very magical. And I don't mean airy fairy magical. I mean, there's a dark side of that as well. And it was like, I just had to go through it. You know, once I got into it, I couldn't get out of it until it was over. It was like that. And there was a real love there on both sides as well. So it wasn't easy. No, definitely wasn't easy at all. I suffered a lot, actually. But, you know, for me, that was a great, it was a great, you know, what should I say? It was very meaningful. And especially when I spoke to the abbot after Shabdrung had died. By the way, he died in meditation. Shabdrung died in meditation and was in meditation 3 years after he had died. And I went to see him and sat outside the kudung and sat there for most of half a day. So who was he? He was who he was, but it didn't come out until he died. That was the thing that I understood, because it didn't have the conditions to come out. So he was the real deal. And I didn't know it most of the time. Other people thought he was the real deal, but I didn't. To be truly honest, I didn't. I just thought he was behaving very badly. But then I did see that he was, at the end, I saw. He always said to me, it doesn't show until someone dies. It doesn't really show who they are until they die. Wait till you see what I am. He said, wait till you see me die. I mean, what an extraordinary thing to say. He knew who he was. He never doubted it for a second. He even said to the king of Bhutan, he had a meeting with the king of Bhutan, in which he kind of snubbed him, really. He said, the king of Bhutan said to him, prove to me that you're the incarnation of Nawang Namgyal. And he replied to the king, I don't have to prove anything to you. Go find out for yourself. Smoked a cigarette, blew the smoke in his face, and walked out. He never smoked, by the way. So that's what I understood happened. In other words, F off.
In the book, you share a number of conversations you have with him about other lamas, not any lama really in particular, but lamas in general, his opinions of lamas in general. And he says there are only 2 great lamas. The rest only know how to deceive people. And the 2 great lamas he was referring to were Dalai Lama and Shabdrung Rinpoche.
Yeah, that's right. That's what he said. Yeah. He was very haughty and very arrogant. I mean, I'm just using these words now because that's what we would call it. But actually, he felt that he was very, at the same time, that he knew who Nawang Namgyal was, and that he was the incarnation. He knew that. But at the same time, he knew that he was not a very great, he was not getting it right in this lifetime. He knew he had to pass on to the next lifetime before he could do anything. And I don't know, even now, I mean, who's going to who could guess what's going to happen? It's impossible. Don't know the end of that story still. But I enjoyed meeting the reincarnation, and that made me feel I must have done something right, because he really, he really knew who I was, and he really was very happy to see me.
You mentioned that you went to Bhutan before the publication of the book because you felt sure that you wouldn't get in after it. How has the book been received when you published it?
Well, I thought that everyone would denounce me for writing it. In fact, I was very surprised when it got all those good reviews. I really was. It got a lot of reviews. In general, I knew that Tibetans are not going to read this book, and I'm not writing it for Tibetans. I'm writing it because, this is a very strong point I want to make. I wrote it because I suddenly realized after 20 years, he had left me with an extremely good story, and that I was a writer. I had only written Blessing Power of the Buddhas before that, and then another book which sort of wasn't, I don't call it like in the same genre at all. It was a sort of illustrated book, but then I came to Chronicles, and it's I edited and edited and edited out all the too intimate scenes and too sexy scenes and all that kind of thing as much as I could without destroying the nature of the relationship and the story. And many people read it beforehand, advised me, and I still didn't know for a long time whether I was even going to let it be published. And then I thought, what if I die and I never tell this story? So I thought I better go ahead and do it. So I thought it's just like, I didn't have to make a point. I just thought that he left me with a story. And I think it was such a good story. I just saw it as a story and myself as a character in that story. That's how I saw it. So it wasn't any more kind of on top of me, like on top.
Yes, you don't play the I'm a great Kandro because of this card at all in this book.
I hate to even say it, but when I was in Bhutan, they started to call me Kandro. Only the people who knew that I was, and I just couldn't stand it. I said, just don't call me that. Just please don't call me that. I mean, and meant it, because I think it's a very charged term, and I'm not worthy of it, and I didn't set out to be. So yeah, no, it's the last thing I wanted to be. No, it's not. It's a cultural thing. You can marry a very high lama and be a completely ordinary person, and you will be called Kandro. And maybe they're not ordinary people. Maybe they're very special people who look ordinary. I don't know. It's a culture. It's part of a culture that is not my culture. So I try to leave it alone, and keep my feet on the ground. It's not difficult.
Yes, and it's a fascinating look into so many of the dynamics of reincarnation of great spiritual lineage and tradition, and the intersection of that with politics and trauma and mundane circumstance and conditions. It's really right in the middle of that and raises so many interesting questions and themes. And we've actually, I think you've elaborated even further on some of them here.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it's a very charged book. And I think it would make a great film, but nobody's taken it up yet. It would be very demanding. You'd have to take a side or something like that, you know. And anyway, Frida Beatty is also supposed to be a film, but which Kabir Beatty, Frida's son, who's an actor, he's been trying to find a producer for. So maybe that will happen. But in the meantime, I just walk the hills with my dog and do a bit of writing and feel very happy that I can still do 3 minutes of headstand a day. And
wow.
and that I'm fit enough to enjoy life, I guess, really. That's what I'm saying. But you know, that's temporary also.
Yes, I noted on the back that several of your contemporaries endorsed the book. Glenn Mullen, who I've interviewed here many times, Keith Dowman, Mick Brown, have written endorsements on the back of the book.
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, this has been so fascinating. I have a lot more questions that I'd like to ask you, and perhaps we'll have to do a sequel. I might have to petition you for a sequel, because as you said, you have a very interesting book on Frida Beatty, who you informed me is born not too far from where my boat's parked right here in Derbyshire.
That's right.
And also a collection of stories of the 16th Karmapa. Now that's a very interesting compilation, and something I think that I have a lot of questions for you about that, as well as your book, Blessing Power of the Buddha, is very interesting. So I might have to petition you for a sequel.
Go ahead. Petition away.
Consider yourself petitioned.
Okay. Okay. I've enjoyed this very much, actually. And you're very easy to talk to. So I just hope it works on the whole. And that would be great.
Great. Naomi Levine, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.